A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the discussion forum on Don't Ignore the Drylands, Restoring the Forest of Continental Asia. It's really my pleasure to welcome you to this session. My name is Michael Kleiner. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of UFRO, the International Union of Forest Research Organizations. And according to the philosophy of the Global Landscape Forum, which means interactions with participants, collecting information, collecting ideas and knowledge, we have designed this session as a real participatory session on the issue of restoring the forest of Continental Asia. But of course, everything starts with policy intentions, policy processes before actions can be taken on the ground. And therefore, we have divided our session into three very interesting segments. The first segment will be a policy segment where we have distinguished speakers talk about the policy context of Continental Asia, a vast area stretching from southwestern part Iran up to the northeast Mongolia. And as you can see here already, we have representatives of 4 countries who have agreed to come and to discuss forest landscape restoration in their country. So in the policy section, the first half an hour, we discuss and get information on the policy context of forest landscape restoration in Continental Asia. In our second part, we are dealing with technical issues. But technical issues to be discussed on the global level is not very sensible. So therefore, we are focusing on specific situation within the countries. The specific situation in their ecological characteristics, the socio-economic situations, and there you will be requested and asked to join one of these or more of these discussion groups and provide your insights, expertise, and ideas. And in the final session, we would like then to wrap up. We will float an idea on another process of forest landscape restoration suggested by the World Bank, and then wrap up also the technical issues collected in our work here today. So a rich program, and I would like, without further ado, request representative of the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, Mr. Christian Großheim, to give his opening remarks. Christian, please.
Well, yes, good morning, everybody. Good to see that there are so many interested people at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday to hear about restoration in drylands. Welcome here. When we started the Bonn Challenge process in 2011, and we were talking about forest and landscape restoration, I think most of us were looking at the tropical forests when we were thinking about restoring them, because that is where the deforestation and the degradation was ongoing, and that where we probably saw the most of the need to restore. So we are pretty happy that we achieved to have a first Bonn Challenge regional meeting this year in Caucasian and Central Asian region in Kazakhstan in June to discuss with the countries of that region also ways how to restore forests, how to get more land under forest. And that was a good starting point from our perspective. And well, we also have to say that, I mean, this process was conducted mainly by, it works again, was conducted mainly by UNESE, by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, by FAO and IUCN, and it only was supported by the Ministry, well, only supported by the Ministry of Environment with funding. Well, what are the major results of that? I have some numbers, but I have to look it up not to put that wrong. I mean, we have what came out of the meeting were regional pledges for about 2.5 million additional hectares for forest and landscape restoration. That makes it a total right now of 57 pledges, something like that, and 170 million hectares to be pledged under the bond challenge. Armenia is expanding its forest cover up to 20%, which amounts to 260,000 hectares brought under restoration, but it's a 2030 target, not 2020. Uzbekistan is also supporting with a pledge of a total of 530,000 hectares. Georgia has an assisted natural regeneration initiative and determines to do some FLR interventions in degraded and deforested land, not by numbers. But in fact, there is a process which was initiated. There is a process which needs some follow-up, and we will give it some follow-up. There is supposed to be a bond challenge meeting in 2019 in that region again. We will again support it, and I think it is very important to see that in different regions than the tropics, also the bond challenge process is growing, and it's getting more and more dynamic. And it's a good example even for those countries which are still undecided, which do not consider them those tropical countries where we initially looked at, to also join in and to make the bond challenge a real global process, not only in the developing world, but also in the industrialized countries where forest restoration is also an issue from my perspective. So we have the possibility to discuss options here. We should make best use of it, and I wish you all the best of luck discussing the options for 4 countries later on in the day. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Christian, for this introduction. Very important policy context and also the support structure for the region. But what would be a start of a discussion without learning from experiences? And I think we are very privileged to have the president of the National Institute of Forest Science with us, of the Republic of Korea, Dr. Lee Jang-ye, and he will explain a little bit to us about the experiences in South Korea, lessons learned from the forest rehabilitation in South Korea. Professor Lee, please.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start the presentation, I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to all the agencies involved in this important event. My special thanks goes to Mr. Christian Groassam from German government, Ms. Miriam Kuzi from IUCN, and Professor John Stentov from Estonian University, and above all the participants are here today. As Michael mentioned, the title of my presentation is Lessons Learned from the Korean Case. So this is outline of my presentation, and I don't have enough time, so I'd go more in depth the section 2, FLR principles and Korean cases. Some background information on South Korea. Between the 10th and 14th century, we had Korea dynasty. As you can guess, our country name Korea was derived from the name of this dynasty. Korea has quite high rate of forest coverage, consisting of 64% of the total land mass. This is the forest transition, excuse me, transition curve in South Korea. As you can see, in 1957, forest coverage was the lowest. Forest growing stock in Korea has significantly increased since 1973, when a comprehensive nationwide forest rehabilitation plan was established and implemented. After the successful forest rehabilitation, forest production has increased a lot, which currently amounts to excuse me, 8.2 billion US dollars, and the percentage of non non-wood forest products is relatively high in Korea, 32%. And another positive consequences of successful forest rehabilitation is the increased forest public services. My institute has evaluated the services since 1990. As of 2014, they amount to 117 billion US dollars per year. The second section is FLR principles and Korean case. I think most of you well know these FLR principles. What I'd like to tell here is to verify the FLR principles by exemplifying what Korea was doing a bit specifically. Adaptive management. I think you think Korea is known as success model for reforestation. However, there are quite some failures, also trial and errors, and they were evolved into and adapted to better next stage. For example, before 1973, there were several medium and long-term plans, but their outcomes were not that successful. Just as I mentioned, first 10-year comprehensive plan in 1973 was well implemented and effective. Such a process of the plans was also shown in the legislative development. Also before 1973, there are 5 very important laws, but ineffective either. Same was to even international support. Before 1973, there were a few international collaborations to Korea, but unfortunately, outcomes of them were not that satisfactory. So, if it is not the medium and long-term plans, nor the legislative measures, even the international collaborations, then what would be the critical factors for the successful forest rehabilitation? And I think an answer to this question would be to have an adequate implementation capacity. In 1973, forestry sector was significantly strengthened. Korea Forest Service was transferred to the Ministry of Home Affairs because at the time the ministry directly supervised local and police administration. The transfer means the integration of forest with local and police administration. At the same time, within local government, a forest sector became majorly expanded. At the provincial level, Forest Division was elevated to Forest Bureau, which was about 3 times expansion. And at county offices, sections became divisions. At the early stage of forest rehabilitation, there was a strong governmental leadership, but gradually, the role of village efforts became significant. and there was a blending of the top-down and bottom-up approach. The latter was by Forest Owners Union. Opinions of village forest cooperatives were proceeded to a county level and then to a national level. For people's participation, income generation is really critical. In the 1970s, there were big activities to raise public awareness, such as by issuing post stamps and publishing various types of brochures. This is a slogan tower in front of the central government building, and the Korean says a nationwide people's planting period. I will skip this slide. And landscape level implementation. In 1970s, the new village movement was one of the highest national agenda. As you imagine, it was to modernize rural areas and economy. And forest rehabilitation was an important component of the movement. It was a good example of integrated approach. Obviously, substitution of firewood was one of critical success factors. As you can see here, this is the consumption of firewood. As firewood decreased, the coal consumption significantly increased. In the mid-1970s, there were about more than 300 mountain dwellers. And the government formulated a comprehensive relocation plan, and it was successfully implemented based on incentives such as housing and breeding livestock. Thanks to economic progress in Korea, rural people migrated to the urban areas to get a job, and they could afford to buy fossil fuels rather than collecting wood fuel. This is President Park, who was at the seat from 1961 to 1979 for 18 years. Evaluations on him have been debated a lot, whether he was a great contributor to the economic progress or merely a dictator. But I think his role and leadership was very important for the success of forest rehabilitation. I think thanks to his strong political will to green the nation, at least integrated approach was well implemented and done. South Korea would like to share our experiences with other countries. UNCCD Changwon Initiative was adopted in 2014 South Korea, and Korea contributed $2 million annually. With FAO, forest landscape restoration mechanism was established in 2014. With CBD, Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative was also adopted in Pyeongchang in 2014. With Central Asia, Korea signed MOU with Kazakhstan, and its main activity is Aral Sea plantation. With Mongolia, there have been more than 10 years collaboration to build green belt. Let me just close. It's just in summary, adequate implementation capacity, engagement of people, and integrated approach is really critical, cannot emphasize too much. Let me finish with this quote mentioned by Mr. Chateaubriand, the French diplomat. Forest precede civilization, and desert remains. And whenever I see this quote, I have the question, is there any way or possibility to civilization and forest coexist? And today I'd like to leave that question to you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for sharing the experiences of South Korea. A real comprehensive process with institutions and changing a lot of aspects in how people work, how people go about their lives in South Korea. Thank you very much. There has been already in the policy context in Central Asia some activities led by IUCN, and we're very privileged to ask Ms. Miriam Kuzi, coordinator of the IUCN Forest Landscape Restoration at the global level, to talk about outcomes of the Caucasus and Central Asia FLR Capacity Development Workshop. Please, Miriam, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Following up on the Astana Regional Bond Challenge workshop that Christian mentioned earlier, there had been follow-up actions to that workshop, and that was on capacity development event, a workshop held in the Caucasian and Central Asia region. And I just wanted to explain a little bit today about what we did there and some of the outcomes from that particular meeting. So the Caucasian and Central Asia region have also been using or have already done a lot on forest landscape restoration, so it's certainly not new. What we did there was bring a lot of countries together to discuss their experiences and exchange on where they were and discuss next steps for accelerating action on forest landscape restoration as part of the Bond Challenge pledges that have been made. It is recognized in the Caucasus and Central Asia region that restoration of degraded and deforested landscapes using FLR, forest landscape restoration, as an approach, well, that has gained a lot of recognition there for countries to achieve multiple national and international priorities on mitigating climate change, enhancing vulnerable communities, improving their livelihoods, reducing desertification, and conserving biodiversity in the region. Commitment to forest landscape restoration is already evidenced by the range of ongoing restoration projects in the region, as well as their countries' expressions and interest to join the global restoration movement under the Bond Challenge. Here you see an overview of those countries and the pledges made. As of now, this is just a little over 2.6 million hectares. So what is the promise of the Bond Challenge? Well, it's an implementing vehicle, as I mentioned, for CCA countries wishing to meet national goals on forest landscape restoration to achieve international commitments on climates, SDG, the LDN targets, and biodiversity. They can access technical support to implement and scale out forest landscape restoration and track it, using tools and methodologies and expert knowledge that's available, as well as peer-to-peer exchanges during these typical events on capacity development that have been taking place in all the regions across the globe. Countries also recognize that this is a good way to tap into additional resources and opportunities that exist for financing of forest landscape restoration. IUCN and partners have been supporting many countries across the globe to take next steps to deliver restoration at scale on the ground. So far, we have helped countries assess the restoration potential of nearly 500 million hectares worldwide in over 26 countries and 35 national and subnational jurisdictions to develop FLR plans, strategies, legal frameworks, and investment plans. For about 160 million hectares of that, there is a very robust evidence base for restoration opportunities and implementation plans. So, going from pledges to action, and this is probably pretty much the point where we are at in the CCA and Caucasian region, so I wanted to just stand still with this particular slide, going from pledges to action. So one of those is on capacity development. We've been doing that recently in 6 November. Landscape scale decision making, very important as well, and equipping decision makers, corporate sector, governments, communities with the tools and knowledge to implement FLR, to generate data so that those decisions are well informed, and so that analytical expertise to guide forest landscape restoration for action and policy is very important. Moreover, the restoration opportunities assessment methodology, which we have used, the capacity development focused on both forest landscape restoration and common definitions, but also on the restoration opportunities assessment methodology as a means to make FLR actionable, but it convenes also a unique space for multi-stakeholder engagement and agreements in that process. IUCN has also been a leading implementer of land degradation neutrality target setting in the region, and was certainly bringing all that into the agenda, and the Bond Challenge Barometer of Progress to track these commitments. IUCN is also an implementing agency for the GCF and JEF, and we are running the Coalition for Private Investment in Conservation. Through these programs, we've helped many countries to build the technical capacities of their own staff across different sectors and agencies involved in FLR. On 6 November, in Georgia, IUCN organized, together with the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, and with the financial support from BMU, a 3-day capacity development workshop. Again, it focused on tools and methodologies to identify opportunity areas for landscape restoration, potential restoration models that could be implemented and scaled out in the region. We looked at methods to analyze costs, socioeconomic and environmental benefits were discussed, guidance on monitoring, and the process of doing a restoration opportunities assessment methodology. But it gave equal time and opportunity for countries to exchange and share experiences within the countries that have already been doing a lot of work on forest landscape restoration, and discuss next step for support going forward, and there certainly will be follow-up actions coming out of this. So some of the challenges and drivers of degradations that we discussed, it's an important aspect of where we start. The entry point for forest landscape restoration is degradation. The LDN comes into that as well very strongly in the target setting that had been done in the region. And so I wanted to share with you some of the more common drivers of degradation that came out of the situational analysis that took place during the event, to develop a theory of change for the region as an important component of Rome. So here are some of them: climate-induced drought, fuelwood removal, uncontrolled grazing, unsustainable harvest timber, conversion of grasslands for agriculture. Well, I think you can probably pretty much read them here for yourself, but it's quite a long list, a huge diversity of different drivers, and these are just a couple of examples of actually what came out of that very long list. We also looked using trends.earth, which is a CI tool from Conservation International. We looked at preliminary mapping and took those to the event. And this is based on primary production, land cover, and soil organic carbon. And the purpose here was to to have that as a basis for discussion and to demonstrate also the option of including many kinds of spatial data that relate to the previous drivers of degradation that I just showed you by adding those layers to this particular degradation map to get more locally adapted results. This would then provide the countries after the workshop with the opportunity to have a deep dive and potentially as part of a broader Rome process in countries. After discussing the drivers of degradation and looking at maps, participants also looked at the opportunities and cost benefits, prioritization of restoration areas and interventions, and this report will become available and list all of those. It's too much to go through all of that today, obviously, but if anyone's interested in that, it will come up on our website very soon. Then on the peer-to-peer exchanges, I just wanted to mention a couple of things that had joint agreement on priority areas and interventions, and this was really related to the mixed farming systems, the restoration in Tugai forests, obviously the Aral Sea restoration, planted forests and assisted natural regeneration with key species such as pistachio. In fact, many other nuts and fruit trees were discussed. And we also discussed needs assessments of countries, so what would it take to go to the next step? So the representatives from the countries defined further regional needs and next steps for the landscape restoration in their own countries, which is here just a very brief summary. They would request technical underpinning. They are requiring financial and technical support. They would like to strengthen national and local capacities, action on the ground, knowledge generation, data needed in order to inform decision-making on best practices for FLR, local species, equipment, materials, etc. And of course, financing for forest landscape restoration, GEF 7, blended finance, and a regional fund addressing transboundary issues. The other one was the potential of having a regional platform in the lines of 20 by 20 or AFR 100, which have been very instrumental in catalyzing the movement, I would say, on the ground. And then the very last slide, just to recap the outcomes again. The event really was targeted towards equipping countries with knowledge and skills needed to implement FLR, establish that foundation so they have something to build on in 3 days. I think we achieved a lot. There's networks set up and interaction taking place, and we've provided, hopefully, the tools and methodologies needed to take the first steps at country level. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Miriam, for your presentation. Excellent summary of what has so far been done, also bridging very nicely from policy, of course, to action. Yeah? So I think these are very important activities taking place in the region. And of course, with this, we would like to close our policy segment first, and I would like to thank the speakers and the contributions for this. And we would dive directly now into our interactive technical segment. So thank you very much for your contributions. And for our technical interactive segment, the idea was that we zoom, of course, and this is very important, into various countries, because implementation of FLR definitely is a national task, local task, a region in the sub-regions within countries. It's a vast area, and therefore we would like to discuss FLR, restoration activities and opportunities in 4 different countries. And for that, actually, we have the privilege to have on board here in our session moderators and experts from 4 different countries. I would like to ask Professor Stantor from the Estonian University of Life Sciences and Associate long-term associate of UFRO, to give a short introduction into restoration challenges in the Continental Asia, and then also introduce the country moderators and dive then into our interaction session. Thank you very much, John.
How does this work?
Just the right side here, I think.
Just that one?
Yes, I think.
And then, was this the...
I think this one, yes. Or this one forward. Yes, and
Okay.
then forward.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here on a Sunday morning. My task this morning is to, getting some feedback here. My task this morning is to give just an introductory overview of what we've been doing in Central Asia, actually for about the past 10 years. So some of the challenges, whoa, wrong way. Technology is the challenge, the big one, okay. There we go. So to give you just an idea of sort of a generalized view of the diversity that's apparent in Central Asian forests. It's essentially a dry land. It's the interior of a large continent. So for the most part, things are arid, semi-arid, but you also have topographic gradients with several very high mountain ranges scattered throughout the region. So in a generalized sense, at the very highest elevations, the typical natural vegetation are spruce forests, picea, with, of course, intermixed with fir and pines, the typical montane forests of continental areas in the northern hemisphere. Coming down in elevation, it's very much the managed forest. That's where you begin to find a lot of managed plantations of spruce, larix, and other species. And something that's very significant in the region, in several of the countries, you have fruit and nut forests. These are wild ancestors of many of our cultivated horticultural crops. So, for example, walnuts, almonds, cherry, peach, all of these have, it's thought, have originated in these countries. Of course, there's been a lot of trade in this region as well. This is known as the Silk Roads, the regions where the caravans traversed for many centuries. So there's been a lot of introduction of species too. So it's hard to say exactly where things are natural or have been naturalized. But in coming down in that elevational gradient, you begin to also go up in the aridity index. So things get drier and it turns into more open juniper forests. Again, the nut forest, pistachio forests in several of the countries have been extensive. And the two-guy forests that Miriam talked about, these are the riparian zones where you have typical poplar and populus and other kinds of salix species that are very typical in those zones. And then into the very dry regions and the desert margins where salt-tolerant Saxol is a very important component. So that's just a general overview just to give you an idea of the kind of forests we're talking about. So very different from tropical forests. In some cases, not even continuous canopy forest, but more like open and grading into woodland forest. And in the Saxol region, it's almost like a shrub zone. So a very important concept in this region is water. And these mountain forests, these mountain areas dispersed through the region are the water towers of Central Asia. This is an interior basin continent, and there's just been a recent paper in Nature Geoscience that shows that the groundwater storage in these continental basins is declining worldwide, and this is especially apparent in Central Asia, where water withdrawals have really changed the environment in significant ways, and we'll talk about that more, and it's also been hinted at in the Aral Sea bed bottom and the problems there. But the mountain forests provide critical ecosystem services not only for the people in the mountain areas, but also very much into the lowland areas. So transboundary water issues are important already and will become increasingly important under climate change. This is also a very active seismic region. Natural hazards, especially in the mountains, are critical. There are areas, and I know somebody used a pointer, but no, that wasn't it. Anyway, At the bottom two pictures there, you can see what looks like an alluvial fan with a nice little village in Tajikistan. That was a mud flow that came from an earthquake event that activated landslides in the mountain areas. You had a mass movement and mud flow down and wiped out the village. This is not an uncommon feature in these areas. So the natural hazards are important, and forests in providing soil stability in the mountain areas, it's a critical ecosystem service. Degraded forests, then you lose that ability to counteract some of the natural hazards. There's other sorts of hazards, meteorological hazards, and climate is changing in the area. So just in a general sort of projection, these are two different RCPs. And you can see in the upper right there, in the year 2000, the mean annual temperature in this whole region was about 7 degrees centigrade. It's projected under a very modest climate mitigation effort, the RCP 4.5. It's still going to go up 3 degrees. And it's even more critical under more change in climate, but also less attention to climate mitigation. So it's already an arid and semi-arid environment for the most part, and it's getting more arid over time, which means on the ground then that populations are moving, there's more demand for water, and because there's a culture and a history and a current reality in many of these countries of a nomadic and semi-nomadic lifestyle, you have a lot of herders moving around, and they will be moving higher up in elevation in order to secure fodder for their animals. So moving more into the forested zone. That's one of the critical factors, the degradation drivers. So there is over-harvesting for fuel wood and house construction. Another critical aspect of many of these countries is that they're in transition politically and economically. So there's laws on the books that say to do one thing, but the reality on the ground is doing different. So actual management of forest is in many cases not what we would consider sustainable. And the reality is that there is over-harvesting, there's encroachment for fuel wood, there's also for grazing, and just illegal logging. Unsustainable exploitation of non-timber forest products is critical as well, and these especially in the nut forests that are essentially protected, but that means they're also not managed. So there's a lack of regeneration. Many of the forests are becoming over-mature, and the forest laws are not conducive to sustainable forest management at this time. Wildfires are somewhat prevalent, especially in some areas. And again, this is where the nature and the policy mix. In some cases, in Mongolia, for example, I think it's still the case, Batu, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you can't cut trees in some areas unless they've been damaged by fire. So people set fires so they can cut the trees. So this is an example of policy needs that need to be rectified over time. Wind, water, and soil erosion are essentially everywhere. We've heard a lot about desertification, and there's climatic reasons, and there's also anthropogenic reasons for that desertification trend. I've talked about water extraction for agriculture and for industrial purposes is a significant problem in some of these areas, and very small impact or very small aerial extent of degradation is caused by mining, but it has a significant impact regionally sometimes because of its effect on groundwater resources. Just an example of the case of water withdrawals. These are some figures some graphics of the Aral Sea that's bounded by Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And this is due to water extractions for agriculture primarily over time. The black is the water extent of the sea. 1960, it was a large water body. By 2009, it's been reduced to a very small area. And the exposed seabed then is a major environmental problem because all of that salinized surface soil is subject to wind erosion, creating windstorms that have a very adverse effect on neighboring communities. You can just imagine all of that salty dust blowing around in villages because of the exposure of that sea bottom. So that's a significant need to have that area restored or somehow stabilized. So some of the obstacles to forest landscape restoration in the region, these are more social obstacles. In many cases, there's an inadequate legal framework for sustainable forest land management because of the legacies of previous socioeconomic conditions. This is changing over time. This has been a very active area for donor involvement, FAO in particular. Inadequate land tenure reforms in some cases. There's a drive to make some of these nomadic communities more sedentary, which means concentration of livestock in some areas, and so more overgrazing in some areas. But also, as we heard from Professor Lee, one of the external drivers for successful restoration in many cases is just moving people into urban areas, just reducing the impact in rural areas. So over time, this may occur or may not occur in Central Asia. Limited capacity of local institutions in many cases. Because of the transition, the political transition, at one time, these former Soviet republics had very adequate forestry resources from central government, but then with the breakup into individual countries, those resources have been declining, and this has been a very difficult transition time for people working in these fields. And then lack of adequate financial resources for forest management. But I don't want to paint too bleak a picture because things are changing, things are improving, and things are getting better. So this is something that we hope to support over time. So that's the brief overview. And as Michael has said, our idea for this session was to be very participatory. And so we have people at different tables from these different countries. I'm not going to give extensive introductions, but this is the moment when you get to choose which country you want to go hear and discuss more about some of these drivers and restoration challenges in different countries. So we have from the Southwest, Professor Tagib, I know him as Khosrow, Sagib Talibi from Iran. In Kyrgyzstan is Mr. Muslim Rajabayev from because of the reorganization, I'll probably get the institution's name wrong, but it's the Forest Research Institute of the Kyrgyz Republic. And from Kazakhstan, Professor Yulia Borisova from the university. In Mongolia, Professor Batu Niamosor. So these are folks, as I said, we've been working together probably for the last 10 years. And so they are very competent and very knowledgeable about what's going on in their countries and the region. So please choose the country that you want to get more involved in for about the next 30 minutes, I believe.
Correct, yes. Well, I think we would start as an appetizer that each of the country very briefly explains one of those issues which are very relevant for the country. So, and then of course you can see what is most interesting for you, and then please just group around that country, and then the discussion would start on these tables. And in the meantime, we will collect these ideas and so on, and on those contributions to wrap up and to see where we focus now into real implementation. So I think we would like then to start with Iran, and then further go on to Kazakhstan and then Kyrgyzstan as well as Mongolia, just to see what are the major issues. Please, Khosrow.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody, and also thank you for attending in this session. Okay, when talking about Iran, we should consider the size of the country as well. Just to give you some idea about the size, maybe I believe some of you are already informed or we are familiar with the country, but for those who are not, just let me compare the size of the country with Germany, that now we are still here. This is just a comparison, don't worry. So the country is 4 times larger than Germany, For such a large country, you may expect diverse climate and diverse ecosystem, diverse forest types as well. For example, in the northern parts of the country, along the southern coast of the Caspian Sea, we have the Caspian Forests. It is also called Hyrcanian Forest, a subdivision of Euro-Siberian forests. And I will try just to give you a brief introduction about it, because within 3 minutes we can't go through all this. And I can't also show too many pictures like this. So if you make an imagination, these forests are very, very like and similar to the European forests. We have beech, oak, ash, maple, wild service, alder, very similar trees like here. This region is very humid. The mean annual precipitation is something about 1,000 millimeter. Then in the southern parts of the country, along the Persian Gulf and Sea of Oman, we have the Saharo-Scindian forests, which are sub-dry tropical forests, and some trees like Ziziphus, Prosopis, diverse acacias, and also mangrove forests are growing here. Precipitation here varies between 200 to 400 millimeters per year. Then the rest of the country is more dry, semi-arid, and arid, with precipitation sometimes less than 100 millimeter, up to sometimes 600 millimeter in the western parts. This area is called, the region is called Irano-Turanian, which is a very vast area, and from west it goes further to Anatolia in Turkey, and from east and northeast to Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan as well. In these parts, mainly we have in the western parts along the Zagros Mountains, we have the oak forests. And imagine that this is one of the oldest historical parts of the region, the Mesopotamian, with more than 4,000 years of history, and human impact is very, very huge here. In cold steppic areas, we have different other kind of trees like juniper, as John showed you. But in the dry steppes, we just have some kind of rangelands, and no trees are growing over there. In some cases, also saxaul and tamarisk and haloxylon as well. So may I have the next? No.
Sorry.
Okay. So with what problems we are facing now? What are the factors for forest degradation here? Like many other countries in this region, in Mediterranean region, and also in the western parts of the Asia, we have severe or serious socioeconomic problems. Overgrazing is one of the main issues and one of the main problems. Livestock, sheep, goat in the drier parts, and cow in the humid parts, in the northern parts. They are grazing all over in the forests. Also, illegal logging is one of other issues that causes the degradation in the forest. The traditional agricultural system, also called shifting cultivation. Sometimes wheat and barley are planted even in the forest under the trees and tree canopy. And this causes many, many problems also for the trees, for natural regeneration, and also the degradation. The other issue is industrial development. Mining, as John showed one of the pictures, and other industries, they are all growing in the area, and where they need area to establish and build these industries, they just focus on the forest areas. and on the rangeland as well. Then one of the related issues is also the hydrological manipulation, building of water dams and manipulating of the natural hydrologic system. Also make problems for water supply in the country. And recently, we are facing with climate change. This irregularity of rainfall, sometimes we have a very heavy storms and rainfalls that causes floods, sometimes a long period of no rainfall and a long dry period, increasing of the temperature and decreasing of the rainfall are the main issues. In some parts, we are already facing with the increase of 1 degree Celsius for the temperature, and also in the long term, we have a 20 to 30% decrease of precipitation. Also, it makes some problems now recently with fine sand storms. This is not only in the country inside, but also from the neighbor countries like Iraq, and also from Afghanistan, Pakistan, in some cases further south from Saudi Arabia.
So, Khosrow,
So what are the strategies?
I think we'll save the restoration part for your discussion at the table. I think people have seen the slide.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got
Thank
the
you.
major questions now. You know, we professors, we just keep going on and on. I know you students are very familiar with that. So now let's move to Kyrgyzstan. Muslim.
Thank you very much. Kyrgyzstan is a small country in Central Asia. The country area is around 200,000 cubic kilometers, and the forested area about 1 million hectares. It's around 6% of country area. Main species is in north of our country, spruce species. Main Tenchan Pitsi. In south, walnut forests and the juniper forests. In walnut forests, main species Juglans regia. We love to say in our country largest area of natural walnut. But I would like to say about problems with restoration in Kyrgyzstan. We have some challenges in this field because one of the main field or main industry is cattle breeding. There are some words or some sayings that Kyrgyz people and Kazakh people, because Kyrgyz and Kazakh people very close nations, on the second place on meat eating, because on the first place wolves. Because right now we have livestock number more than in Soviet period. It's around 9 million. It's very difficult to save forests because the people trying to find more convenient places to have their cattle. Even in forested areas, they're trying to use like a pastures. But if we can say that in Soviet period was rotation systems, government helped to rotate pastures, winter pastures, spring pastures, but now we have many private lands, private livestock, and they, all of them themselves decide when and where they want to use pastures. Mostly they don't spend money to get more far pastures, and they use places around villages, around cities, and we often have overgrazing. In these photos you can see some places around villages, but now, but at the same time we can say that now some people are trying to use, if they have money or time, trying to use forests like a business. Mostly it's fruit trees. In these photos, spruce forests, walnut forests, and juniper forest types. That's all.
Thanks, Muslim. So now we move to Kazakhstan. Yulia.
Participants of the forum. So I would like to say just some words about Kazakhstan and Kazakhstan forests. So the territory of Kazakhstan is 2.7 thousand square kilometers, but only the 5% of the territory is covered by by forests. We have the main restoration challenges in Kazakhstan. It's about the Tugay forest or riparian forest that John already said about. So it's this overgrazing, of course, and also we have this pasture degradation due to this mining, and also forest fires, of course, take place in our forests, and illegal harvesting, and also, I'm sorry, about the, could you please the next slide, please, John? Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. No, the previous one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So about the degradation of the dried bed of the Aral Sea. So as you can see in the photos, it's about the soil salinity and soil degradation of this Aral Sea, and dust wind, which occurs and which depends on the people which live in the villages of Kazakhstan. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. So now in Mongolia.
So let's move to the little bit northeast in the Asian continent. So Mongolia actually is located in between landlocked country within the Russia and China. So we don't have access to the sea. So as we can see here, there's some different pictures which were taken and I used to provide for the audience. So actually the Mongolian government saying that and also nominating that Mongolia has the different types of environmental issues, including those things, which is directly influence effects on the forest ecosystems. So as I mentioned, Mongolia is the landlocked country, and also at the same time it's very high altitude. It's the average elevation of Mongolia is 1,500 meters. The capital of Mongolia is the highest elevated, the capital in the world. So in terms of the land territory, it's almost equal to the Iran. So it's the 4 times bigger than in Germany, which we stay here. But due to this, the topography and the landlocked country, the Mongolia has the different climatic conditions compared to the other countries. And according to aridity index, 91% of the Mongolian total territory belongs to the arid, semi-arid area, except in the northern part where the mountain forest is actually the southernmost of distribution of the Siberian taiga forest. There is many different issues on the forest, traits, so including the livestock raising, similar to the Central Asian countries, but Mongolia has much more livestock compared to the other countries, because still we have almost half of population is used to live in a nomadic way. So you can see here the overgrazing, even in the forested areas, or even though in the steppe, where the only sparse forests of the almost different types of the broad-leaved species. So illegal logging, etc., also similar to the effects many other countries in the Central Asia. So same time, Mongolia has very harsh climate. Nowadays in Ulaanbaatar, in the nighttime, you can experience around 30 degrees, minus 30 degrees. But during the summertime, you can experience plus 30 degrees in the Ulaanbaatar city. There's very big fluctuations among the diurnal and seasonal fluctuation that will be also affecting and stressing the forest. Next, please. So there is many different traits on the forest. I can say that direct and indirect one. So most of the main top drivers are the forest fire. That's the mostly wildfires due to the continental climate and the logging, specified commercialized logging, specifically for actually also the illegal logging at the same time. Yeah. So the other one is pest and outbreaks. I'm not sure mention that there should also, I should mention there is also direct effect impacts of the mining industry is one of the main component of the GDP of Mongolia, except the livestock breeding. So the top one is the mining industry. Even though then we do have some, due to that mining industry, and not only in the forested mountain areas, and also the Gobi Desert area, where you can see one of the largest copper mining in the world. And as you can see, these top three drivers and continued depletion of the forest is still ongoing in the country of Mongolia. So you can, from the northern part, we have mountain forest, and then in the middle part, we have the steppe and dry steppe area. In the southern part, we have the desert, Gobi Desert area, so which is covering almost 40% of the countries. And sometimes, even though in the Gobi area, we do have some forests, saxaul forests, similar to Iranian, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, which is the very important component for the Gobi Desert ecosystem, which is included also as one component for the forest resources in my country. Okay.
So now we're going to break up into the tables, and I would ask the moderators to pick the main topic that you'd like to talk about and get the discussion started by throwing out maybe a question. And we see that there's a common theme here. Overgrazing is very common throughout the region. So let's not all talk about overgrazing, and let's not so much talk about what the problems are, but sort of brainstorm what are some potential solutions. So Muslim, if you would concentrate on mountain forests and the problems there, and Batu on desertification in the very arid areas, Yulia, the Aral Sea, okay? And Khosrow, I think maybe the overgrazing issue is a good one for you to concentrate on, because you have such a diversity of forest types where overgrazing is impacting. So now, very quickly, move to the tables and begin your discussions. And we have rapporteurs from the International Forestry Student Association to take down all of your great thoughts.
ladies and gentlemen, I know that interrupting discussions and debates and collective work, of course, is always very difficult. I have to take this task now and request you that we are finishing our discussion. We have collected some of those issues you have discussed, those maybe some strategies as priorities for the countries, and we would like now to move to our third segment of our event, in more or less wrapping up our discussions. And for this purpose, I would request Ms. Paola from the World Bank to come to the stage, as well as Professor Stantov. Please, Paola, come here. You speak there. Now we are in our closing segment. Briefly, of course, we try a little bit to summarize the main points you have made in your discussions, but before that, I would like to ask Mrs. Paola Agostini, Lead Natural Resources Management Specialist of the World Bank, to share those initial ideas on an 30 by 30 initiative of forest landscape restoration in continental Asia. Please, Paola, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion forum. I would like to say that this has really been, in some sense, music to my ears to finally talk about forest and landscape restoration in Europe and Central Asia. We have been talking so much for so many years about the tropics, as Christian from BMU was mentioning. So having the opportunity to discuss the kind of forest, the pictures that you show for this forest of Central Asia, it's fantastic. And, I'm from Italy, so it speaks to me so much. And I, was a bit always worried that we were only focusing on the tropics, which are very important, but I think it's now time also to increase our ambition and work also on our own, Europe and Central Asia kind of forest. So I just wanted to say that, building on the Astana resolution and on the capacity building workshop that was organized by UCN and the others, it's starting we are starting to think that maybe the region is mature and is ready for actually scaling up the ambition and think bigger about a possible initiative that would drive, that would move from political pledges into implementation. And what do we need to do that? And it really comes out all the time to four elements. We need to work more on policy actions. We need more funding. We need more funding for forest and landscape restoration. We need to work with the private sector. They have an important role. Right now, we cannot do much without the collaboration between public sector and private sector. And we need to work in partnership among the university, the donors, the private sector, and of course the governments in the countries. So if we want to have this element together, thinking really and being more ambitious, why not create an initiative for Europe and Central Asia or for Central Asia only? And I was just, getting inspired, if you want, by the fantastic initiative that we already have in Latin America. There is one called Initiative 20 by 20. In Africa, there is another one called Africa 100. And why not one in Europe and Central Asia called, ECA 30 by 30? It's just, an idea. And 30 by 30, what it means? It might mean 30 million hectares by 2030. It's not any scientific basis for 30 by 30. It's just a marketing thing, but why not? The region is so big, and it's really just a way of being aspirational and really working towards something all together and joining forces. The example that we get from Latin America for Africa, when you have these kind of initiatives, that they really bring people together towards a common objectives. And so I just wanted to mention it. The World Bank is really interested in working on forest and landscape restoration, on grazing issues, on the bringing together forest and agriculture in this land for a better management of the landscape. I think we are in a fantastic moment to do something in Europe and Central Asia, because most probably the UN, hopefully, are going to declare a decade for landscape restoration, the next decade. We are talking about having another Bonn Challenge meeting, it was mentioned by Christian, in the region maybe next year. We can have, maybe the 10th anniversary of the Bonn Challenge in Europe and Central Asia, which would be a fantastic way to really sort of move the agenda. So I think that things are aligning. The European Union is preparing the new 7 years common agricultural policy, so we can also work with them on this. So all these things are aligning, and I think it's a good moment to start, thinking about an initiative. So I wanted just to leave this idea on the table, this seed in your mind, and then try to all think about it, and maybe why not having a next GLF meeting in somewhere in Central Asia next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paula. Of course, I'm sure that those organizations represented here, including you, of course, we will support this idea, and you can count on us in terms of content, in terms of bringing reality to the table of these discussions, which of course is the fuel for a fruitful outcome. Now I would like to wrap up and ask Professor Stantov to give us a short overview of what actually has been discussed in the different countries for priorities for future work on landscape restoration.
Didn't start with the first slide, so never mind. So there we go, restoring the forests of Central Asia. We can see that we have a variety of problems. We've already talked about those. I'm not going to talk about them anymore, but just to throw this up here to remind you of the diversity of issues. And we've tasked each of the groups to focus on one issue, not that that's the only issue, but maybe it's an important issue in that country. And then to think about how the results I'm going to give you could be transferred to the other countries to address their own issues. But in all cases, context is important. As you move from broad visionary goals to implementation on the ground, you have to consider the local context, the local social and economic and ecological context. So just very briefly, some overview guidelines. In all cases, halting degradation is the most important step, because it doesn't do any good to restore if you're going to have to go back and restore it again in 20 years because it's been degraded again. Conserving and rehabilitating native forests is a critical issue. We talk about restoration, and many people think that's planning and creating new forest areas, but it's important to also rehabilitate and conserve existing native forest areas. And then planting and agroforestry where it's needed, where trees are lacking, and in all cases, adapting to future climate. So in your groups, you've identified some, or you've discussed some critical issues, and you've possibly identified some approaches to some solutions. So what I heard was in Iran, grazing in many forest types occurs, and maybe rotational grazing is an answer. But now let's think about what rotational grazing means. Does it mean excluding animals from all forests all the time, or most of the time? Not necessarily. There are different aspects of grazing in forests that we have to overcome. One is, of course, trampling and soil compaction. So moving the animals around so that they're not concentrated in the same areas all the time. That's an aspect of rotational grazing. But also in forest regeneration is an important issue that animals impede. So in some places, at some times, you do have to exclude animals from the forest when it's time to regenerate them. So those are, but then those bump up against real social issues. So you have to also include the local people in these solutions. And again, showing the benefit to the local people of these long-term investments, in academic terms, long-term investment in improving environmental capital. So moving on then to Kyrgyzstan, we talked about, focused on mountain forests, and one of the issues there seemed to be access rights because of grazers moving into forested areas in the mountains, and the need for greater transparency in what's going on. And so possibly collaborative management is a way of approaching those issues and involving stakeholders as well as government organizations and moving towards a more collaborative and co-management sort of focus on areas regardless necessarily of what the legal definition of ownership is. In Kazakhstan, I asked you to talk about the Aral Sea, and we talk about restoring the Aral Sea, but in truth, we're not going to restore the Aral Sea. We're not going to give that area the water that it once had because it's being consumed, and there will be problems in the future of even having enough water for the population and the agriculture that goes on. So in the Aral Sea, you're trying to solve an environmental problem. You're trying to stabilize very unstable areas and reduce the health problems to local communities. So we have a lot of experience with saksal as a salt-tolerant species. It won't grow in all of that seabed, but in many parts of it, it's a significant approach to using saksal. But there's possibly other species, other halophytes that could be used in areas where saksal would not be successful. So we have old technology and we need new technology to address that problem. And in some places where the area has been salinized by improper irrigation, so former agricultural lands, it could be possible to integrate food crops, non-irrigated food crops within the stabilized saksal areas as a way of providing livelihoods. So there's not one simple solution for the whole Aral Sea problem. There's many potential areas, but again, local context, what works where is an important thing to identify. And finally, the desertification issue in Mongolia. It's been recognized in Mongolia as an issue for many, many years. They've approached it in many ways. Again, because of the climate and anthropogenic origins of the desertification. And they've worked on vegetational barriers to desertification, but also the people issues with grazing. And one of the ongoing research areas in Mongolia right now is establishing these vegetational barriers to desertification around the Gobi and the near Gobi areas. And I've seen some of these plantations on field trips. It's amazing to see poplars growing in the desert, but it is possible where there's groundwater resources that can be utilized. But again, it's not something that's going to be done everywhere by government agencies. It involves the local people benefiting from those solutions and contributing to the ongoing management and sustainability of these solutions. So very briefly, that's the overview of what's been provided, and we thank you very much for your hard work. I know it was a very short and intense period, but you all rose to the occasion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, John, for this wrap-up. Of course, you have seen what John has explained, and you have actually uncovered and brought to the table in the different country contexts. These are hard decisions to be made. It's easier said than done. It takes time, but I think we all know the issues, because if they would be easy to solve, we would have, or you would have solved them already 20, 30, or 50 years ago. I would really like to conclude now this very intensive session. I would first of all like to thank the National Institute of Forest Science of Korea for funding and for providing the resources that we could come together here and have this session. So thank you very much, President Lee. I would like to yes, a big applause to Korea. I would like to thank our collaborators, the IUCN, the World Bank, and CIFOR for joining in, so have a comprehensive session here. And of course, I would like to thank the moderators, Professor Stantov, and all our colleagues from Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, as well as Mongolia, for all the preparatory work they have done, that we could actually discuss these details here. Also, I would like to thank the IFSA students who actually have helped to moderate, to collect the ideas. So you got a flavor as young people a little bit. It is not that easy to run such a discussion. Yeah? It needs planning, but maybe it's also a little bit you got some ideas how to do these things. And of course, last but not least, I would like to thank the participants. First of all, to stay over time, so we actually used the coffee break also, for your patience and also for your active participation. And I very much look forward to discuss this issue on Central and Continental Asia again with you in the near future. Thank you very much.